Hey guys, welcome back to Project Bodybuilding, here with a very different format today. So what I'm going to do for you today is recap yet another call out of the Arnold Classic. I've been recapping Classic, some of the other call outs, but it is getting a little redundant. So in order to save time and keep this video relevant, by getting it out sooner, I'm going to do something a little bit different with the format today. This isn't a full-scale video with all the crazy graphics and the scripting. There's just me, some notes, and we're going to react to this video of the third call out. I don't know if I'll keep doing this format, but if you guys like it, let me know down in the comments. So yes, the whole point of this video is to keep it short and sweet, so let's go ahead and get right into it. Remember, if you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. So as I said, we will be going over every single mandatory pose from the third call out, which consisted of James Hollingshead, Akeem Williams, William Bonac, and Sean Clarita. But first things first, I do have to shout out Rep 1, which is the channel we are viewing this video on. This is their video. Honestly, between Gilco and Rep 1, I actually preferred Rep 1's footage and their media that they put out to Gilco's this time around. So big shout out to them, and I do recommend you go and subscribe to their channel because their content is actually really good. So let's go ahead and start with the front double biceps. Now I will be using my ranking system, which means every guy will be ranked first to fourth in this pose since there are 4 guys. And if they rank fourth, they'll get 4 points and they'll correspond with their placing. So first equals 1 point, second equals 2 points, and so on. So the lowest score at the end of the comparison wins, and we will also take into account how many poses each guy wins as well. But anyway, let's first go ahead and start with the front double biceps. First off, we're going to start with fourth, and that's going to be James. I find him to be the least impressive. I do just kind of see him as the odd man out here. He is off to the side, so he does have to contend with the awkward camera angle. It's not as flattering as, say, Sean Clarita, but Sean is 5'2", so I would say it's a worthy handicap. It's a handicap I don't really mind too much. But regardless, I don't think it's just the camera angle. The fact is, he is very narrow. In some instances, he will be outwithed, so to speak, by people that are shorter than him, namely William Bonac. And he just takes up a lot less space on stage than he should for his height. Not only that, but he just kind of lacks depth. He lacks these finer details of someone like Akeem, Bonac, and even Sean Clarita. All these guys are either way more conditioned, have more details, muscle maturity, you name it. It's just for whatever reason, James has this type of physique that just isn't very detailed. He can get in very good condition, and he was in very good condition here, but he's just, the details just don't shine through on his physique. And, I don't think that's anything but genetics. I don't think he has anything to blame but his parents, which he should blame deeply, of course. So he's going to take fourth, but another odd man out is actually Akeem Williams. He's an odd man out for good reasons. He is the tallest guy in this lineup and the biggest guy in this lineup. And those guns, he easily wins the arms. He has big, thick, and cut quads. And yeah, the high lats are, it's not ideal, but they're still wide lats, still fairly thick lats, and the waist is very small. It would be one thing if he had the high lats and a narrow structure, kind of like James does. He has kind of the worst of every world with a wider waist, narrow shoulders, and then also kind of high lats. Akeem at least has very wide lats, a very wide shoulder structure, shoulder, he's very wide, and then a very small waist. And then altogether, he's just dwarfing everybody here through pretty much every body part. So he's the odd man out, but this time it's because he's going to first. And then you have Bonac and Sean left, and they're both doing similar things. They both are very unappealing, I would say, is a nice way to put it in terms of their shape. They're very blocky, very blocky. The midsection, honestly though, I probably have to give it to Bonac just because the abs are a little flatter. The stomach is a little flatter. Sean, he just has these wider obliques, and he has a very bubbly quality about him, but that extends to the midsection, and that's not my cup of tea. It's a bit wider. His lats are wider than Bonac's comparatively, but overall, I don't have Sean winning the midsection, and that's just kind of it. Outside of the biceps, the midsection and the overall shape of this pose is what wins the pose. Not to mention, Bonak's arms are bigger because he's just a bigger guy, and he has bigger legs both proportionally and just outright because he's a bigger guy. He's basically just a bigger Sean Clarita. Both have pretty poor midsections. That's putting it pretty lightly. But that takes us to the front lat spread, and honestly, Akeem just coasts here. He has the biggest structure, and with that, well, not to mention, he has a big structure, but it's really not the best for this pose because while the bone structure is good, the musculature structure, the musculature period of his physique is not that good, obviously, when it comes to the back. Other things are that good. I think it was a little over heavy-handed there, but the lats aren't that good. You know, they're high. But with everyone else being so narrow, he coasts. He coasts here completely. There's no one else with that width, no one else here with those lats. What's interesting, though, is the second biggest guy in this lineup, which you would think would be right there for the second place spot in the overall ranking here, that being James Hollingshead, is going to be fourth. He's just the worst combo of everyone else. Like I said, everyone but Akeem is very narrow. Not only that, but he just has no depth, again, to his physique. Where are the extra details in the chest, the delts? The midsection is completely washed out. Yes, Bonak and Sean are also narrow, but they have cut abs, they have striations in the chest, their arms are fuller and more popping, the delts are more capped off, there are more refined cuts in the legs. So not only does James have the problems of the other two, where his lats are barely wider than his waist, I would say James is actually the worst case of that, but he doesn't even have the pluses of the other two, which are at least passable detail. So I would say the remaining three are all kind of close because they're all kind of bad, but they're bad in the same way. But James is lacking even more than Sean and Bonak. And once again, it does come down for that second place, a battle between Sean and Bonak. Sean is third again because he's just a smaller Bonak. It's kind of like the front double. And his legs are smaller than Bonak's. Again, comparatively and just straight up, Bonak has a lot bigger legs and he's bigger overall. So when they both have good detail, but they're both very narrow, why not just go with the bigger guy? But next we have our first side shot, and this is a size pose. With that said, I don't think I need to tell you that Sean is getting dead last here. He has great details. Yep, that's fine. But you can't be giving up this much thickness and size in a thickness and size oriented pose. And also, I don't like the way he's posing. He tends to like stick his stomach out in this more than his pecs. I'm not a fan, but he was losing already, so I won't go into that. Also, I will say, as good as Rep 1's video is, this video could have been made so much better if they just used a manual focus. I know some of these are going to be a little blurry, and that's not on me. That is on the promoters at the Arnold that chose the Arnold Classic backdrop, it has the waterfalls. But also Rep 1 just refused to manually focus on some of these guys' faces. So you'll have it where it's focused on the background and the physiques in the foreground are actually what the camera is not focusing on. A little frustrating, but again, I do thank Rep 1 for their amazing footage. Anyway, after that tangent, we have a very solid three poses left here. James has a lot of size, but the least amount of details out of the three. Bonak is very good in terms of size, very compact. You know, he has less of a frame to fill out, so he's very good pound for pound muscularity. And then he has the most detail on top of that as well. And then Akeem is kind of a mix of both. Great size, he's the biggest up here yet again. And then very good details. Not Bonak level, but very good. Take a look at that side leg. It's crazy. Crazy as always. And even though he could have been a little more conditioned here, and we saw that towards the end of last year, it's still a crazy side leg. Like, hardly anyone nowadays has lines in their side leg like Akeem. He also has pretty good details. Again, the focus, you can't really see the details in the upper body I wanted to mention, but if you look closely, there are striations in the chest, striations in the delts. Stomach could be a little bit more locked in, but so what? You know, yeah, the stomach could be more locked in, but with that, he's the biggest guy up here, the thickest guy up here, the densest guy up here, and maybe not the most detailed guy up here, but very detailed nonetheless. Would you say he's more detailed than Sean? You'd really need to get a close look. I'd probably say no, but I mean, Sean isn't even in this comparison, quite frankly, at least in this shot. So for all intents and purposes, Akeem is the second most detailed guy here and the biggest mix of both worlds. He takes a pretty strong first. I would put him in first more times than not. But again, the 3 poses we have left are very, very solid. And then for the battle for second this time around, it's Bonac versus James, which is basically a detail versus size debate. James doesn't have the most flattering angle, so maybe some of his size is hidden. You know, like I said, he's off to the side over there. I think you can make the educated guess that he is overall bigger than Bonac. Not pound for pound. I would say they're pretty even in that regard, but overall, structure-wise, height-wise, and just overall scale weight, James takes a slight lead. However, the details on Bonac is what pushes him over the edge for a pretty good second. He just has so much muscle maturity now. He doesn't have the pop of a 2017 version of himself, but the details along with pretty good compact mass allow him to win the pose. I mean, he is straight up winning pretty much everything against James. Everything except the chest, oddly enough, which seems a little bit shriveled, but he's more detailed than James. But then Bonac wins the arm and the delt easily. And then with his better conditioning, you got to give him the side leg as well. So overall, it is kind of a detail versus size debate, and I guess that's technically a 50-50, but it's kind of like a size plus way more detail versus more size debate, and I just don't think James's extra size is enough for the extra detailed Bonac. And next, we have by far the easiest pose of the comparison, the rear double biceps. So what we have here are 2, what I would say are great poses, one below average and one that is abysmal. And I think you can imagine who I'm talking about there. So Bonac is running away with this. I think if you have eyes, you can tell that. You certainly don't need me to tell you that. Best lower body up here, most conditioned, most well-rounded, and then the best back up here as well. Again, most detailed, most well-rounded. That pretty much leaves Sean as the only one that's passable in this pose. Really, the only thing I could say about Sean is the legs could be a bit thicker, but he's still shredded, and his back is insanely thick. These are the only 2 guys that are even passable in this pose. And then you have James, which he's okay. He has a very good upper back, very detailed, pretty good lower body, but half of his back is just missing. He's not that wide at all. Bonac is wider than him comparatively, which is crazy considering Bonac is much shorter and is narrow himself. This really shouldn't be happening. But James's back is just half full and half pretty full. You know, that half that is full, that upper back is pretty good. But then no lats, no mid back, no lower back, which is pretty crazy. You know, he's into the heavy lifts, the deadlifts and whatnot, the squats. But we're just missing a very well-rounded back from James. The top area is good, but that's about it. But by way of Akeem being in the shot with one of the worst rear doubles ever in the IFBB Pro League, James does take third. And Akeem, you know, he had the worst back in the show. He has the worst back in every show he enters. And also, his condition could have been better. Usually the back is at least tight. It's at least dry. It's at least conditioned. But here, it's a little puffy looking. It's a little waterlogged. The lower body is decent, you know. He's pushing the glutes out more this time around and pushing the adductors out more. I don't know if that's the best choice for him, but I like the posing in the back more. I think it makes his lats look minorly, very minorly improved. But yeah, there's just no depth to his back. And it's so weird because he has great arms and delts, monstrous arms and delts, maybe the best up here, and a very solid lower body. Not the best, but a very solid lower body. So you have these great limbs orbiting what is one of the worst backs ever. So it's a weird look, and I think that adds to Akeem doing poorly. It's like punishing him for the same thing twice, but I mean, it is not only a weak back, but it's so weak that it makes the rest of the pose weird to look at, if that makes any sense. But yeah, he's a clear fourth. Overall, this is a very, very easy pose to determine. The next back pose, the rear lat spread, does get a bit more interesting. I'll wait for all of them to get into the pose. James is not going to get fully into the pose when I pause it here, and you just have to take it with a grain of salt. He's going to be on the outer rim of this pose anyway. But first, we can talk about our two winners here, well, or at least our two highest placers here, which I think Bonac still retains it. He has the best lower body again, and yeah, he may not be the widest here, but who's the competition? Sean, who's certainly not wider than him. James, who can't even open up and won't be wider when he opens up. We'll get to that in a second. And then you have Akeem, who is very thick, very rugged, great traps, great erectors, and is wider, but loses the lower half. And then in regards to the back, yeah, he's wider at the peak, but the peak and then the valley is such a big drop off. You have these high lats that swoop out and then immediately retract back in. He has high lats. And then when the condition is off, you don't really see that thickness in its best light. You know, it's one thing when the thickness, those great mountainous traps and erectors are tight, when the skin is tight over them. But now it just looks muddled, murky. William Bonac's back is not too much better, but I would say it's a more complete pose overall. So I would put him in first, and by way of Akeem simply just being wider and easily dispatches the other two. You know, he's probably a half a foot taller than Sean, and James, it's like the same thing, just bigger. He's very narrow, and then his back is also not that conditioned either. Again, I'll let the video play out so you can see his full width, but you're not going to see a whole lot of detail from James in the upper body. Lower body's fine. It beats Sean's, but James is wider than Sean. Sean is thicker and more detailed. Overall, I would go with James over Sean, which puts Sean in fourth, just for that width. I can see an argument for Sean taking this because his back is a lot more conditioned, a lot thicker, and a lot more dense. But let's go ahead and play it. James barely gets into it by the end, and yeah, that's probably it right there. That wasn't much at all. But anyway, next we have the side tricep, which 3 out of 4 of these guys are great in. But this side pose is another size pose, and that instantly puts Sean Clarita out. I love the shreds. However, you just can't compete with this level of mass in a pose like this. It's one thing for a giant killer to slay someone in the rear double based on detail, but in the side tricep, the cuts just aren't enough. Also, his pecs could be bigger. The waist could be smaller. He could have more of that half hourglass shape. You know, what can he even do in this pose? You can't really give him criticism. Are you going to tell him to be bigger? It's simply not going to happen. So he is the odd man out here, leaving 3 poses, but 3 really solid poses, I would say, between James, Bonac, and Akeem. I do have to put James in third yet again, though. I think if it's close, his lack of detail does kind of put him in the back of the pack more often than not. He has great overall size, probably the biggest tricep up here by the looks of it. He's just missing those finer details, and especially in the midsection. Midsection could definitely be better. He could be a little bit tighter or have a little bit more lines through the side leg. You know, he's very conditioned. Like I said, he has no problem with conditioning, really. It's just balancing that with fullness so the muscle lays up against the skin well. He just doesn't have the finer details, which the other 2 guys definitely do. And then that leaves Bonac in second, at least for me. He has less overall size than James, but there's a big step up in condition and in the midsection. That was the main deciding factor for me. I was actually really impressed with Bonac's midsection in this shot, especially compared to James. James, you know, he's streamlined, no obliques, no real ab detail, and Bonac, definitely not the best either, but certainly still locked in and more detailed. But once again, Akeem is there as a marriage between everything you love up here. Pretty streamlined. I wouldn't say he's the most streamlined. I'd actually say that's Bonac. But no one's going to complain about this waist. Side leg, the best up here. Most detailed, even though he's a little off. The biggest up here. Crazy size and detail on the side leg. That arm, absolutely thick. Even though he probably has the 3rd best tricep up here, which is 1 away from last, the overall arm thickness is crazy. And the tricep is still decent, even though he's on the outer rim in that particular body part. And then the pecs, also very dense. It's overall just a beefy pose. You know, he's the beast. Akeem the Beast William, BK Beast, as they call him. And you can tell that here. His level of density and overall thickness is unmatched. And he has very good details as well. So like I said, he's everything you want in the shot. A marriage between every you have the overall size of James, the less size, but more details of Bonac. You get everything with Akeem. So he's going to take first in both of our side shots. But that brings us to the abs and thighs, which is collectively, as an average, the worst pose up here between the four. No one is delivering a knockout shot, and there are some poses that are quite frankly bad up here, like very, very bad, I would say, actually. So you do have this split up into two tiers. You have Bonac and Akeem, which are in a tier above. They're safe from my harsher criticism. But yeah, it's broken up into two tiers, but you have a lot of space in between the next tier, which is James and Clarita, and both of them are pretty poor. So James has almost zero ab definition and a wide waist, and he's narrow in the shoulders, so with that combination, he doesn't really have that good of taper. The legs are good, big, cuts could be deeper, but very good legs nonetheless. Certainly the highlight of the pose. And then for Sean, usually he's hitting that twisting oblique shot, and he should only hit that twisting oblique shot, but he actually wasn't utilizing it a whole lot here. And yeah, I know it's not a head on abs and thighs, and I know some people want to dock points for that. Even if we're docking points for anything but a head on abs and thighs, it's worth it than to showcase what Sean is showcasing here. Technically, better abs than James, but that lower stomach it's an eyesore. It's very bad. I'll leave it at that. And then the quads, usually they're pretty cut, pretty detailed, but I've seen them better. For sure. And then also James is just bigger. So yeah, his pose is like a 2 out of 10. But Sean is making his a negative 2 out of 10 with that midsection flaw. James is bad, but Sean takes a step further. And then you have oblique shots for the remaining two guys, and honestly, you can take your pick here. They're pretty similar. Bonac has the better obliques, but Akeem has the better abs. So, you can say, well, this is an oblique shot. We're putting more emphasis on the obliques. Bonac should be leading. But then you would say, well, this is the abs and thighs shot, and we want good abs first over obliques. We'll take both if we can get it, but we prefer good abs first. So maybe you want to reward Akeem more. I would give Akeem the upper half. I think his obliques are fine, but then he does have the clearer, more separated abs, the actual abdominal muscles themselves. So I would give him a small win up top. For the lower body, again, very similar. They're both thick, striated. Bonac is probably a little more detailed. Akeem is a lot thicker, but also has good feathering like Bonac. You can take your pick here. Probably goes to Akeem. That's at least my pick. Maybe Bonac wins on a little bit more detail, but I'm going with Akeem. That puts Akeem as the small winner. He's, again, no knockout shots here. Far from it. However, a little bit better abs in my opinion. A little bit better core as a whole, I would say, because his obliques are fine too. And then a little bit better thighs. This is a doozy of a pose. Every guy has something to improve here, from a little to a lot. And that brings us to our last pose, the most muscular. And I had to stop it here because, these guys flash through different most musculars. But we will take a look at two different stopping points in this video, stops in the video, so we can get slightly different perspectives and different poses from at least one guy. But anyway, first up, let's just start with first here. I have William Bonac in a slight lead here. I think the midsection is, of course, a little messy. But what I like about him is the pound-for-pound muscularity, sure, but you can get that other places in this pose as well. But the detail. He is detailed from the neck all the way to the calves. There is just so much muscle maturity and detail on display here. Akeem is a very good alternative, though. He is neck and neck with Bonac. Very gnarly striations through the chest, a better midsection, and probably right there in the quads. Probably right there in the quads. Quads. But he's wider as well, bigger than Bonac, I'd say. Is he more muscular pound for pound? Very close. But I think when you put that level of muscle on Bonac's frame, which is smaller, and give it a lot of detail, it looks very impressive. Impressive enough to just barely topple Akeem. But I'd be fine with Akeem winning on this variation as well. And then you have an anticlimactic finish. You know, you have James, which doesn't have a whole lot of details, but then you have Sean that has a lot. But Sean is just... I thought leading into the Arnold he can maybe push in this pose because of the freak factor, because of the detail. But then when you put him next to James, who is off to the side and has the worst camera angle than Sean, and Sean, who has the best camera angle, he's just losing too much ground. He's just giving up too much size. I miss the detail and the finer details on James, but this is the most muscular pose, and James is by far more muscular than Sean. And then we're moving to that second stop that I was talking about, so we can take a look at Bonak's crab, a slightly different type of pose for Clarita, but more or less the same thing from James and Akeem. Everything does stay the same here. I would still put Sean in last. He's the smallest, even though he's the most detailed here. James and Akeem both still beat him on size alone. Even Bonak is beating him on sheer size alone. But then I'd put James in third, who is comparable to Akeem in overall size, but then Akeem has the details. But this time, Akeem is definitely in second. William Bonak's crab, in this pose, he just comes alive. And the details are even more abundant than in his hands class shot. So it's an even better pose. If you thought he was losing in the last shot, I think when you take into consideration this shot, average the two together, you gotta put him in first. Yes, Akeem is maybe a bit bigger overall, but Bonak is certainly big enough. Great quads, great arms, great delts. Great chest, but the details galore is what pushes him over the edge in our final shot. And that brings us to the conclusion of the video. I'll put the scorecard up on the screen, but this clearly breaks down into two tiers. You have James and Sean, and then Akeem and Bonak, and there was actually quite a difference in between those two tiers. I was actually surprised. The latter tier was scoring in the higher 20s, while the first tier was scoring in the mid-teens. So let's talk about that second tier first. Overall, I actually disagree here. So James placed 8th on the official scorecard, and then Sean placed 7th. I am okay with both outcomes, but I would give James the edge over Sean. James did have the slightly lower score, but it was only a 2-point difference. However, you know, and this is not a regular one of my comparisons, but we have the overall physique category section. Had we had that and expanded it to an actual in-depth comparison, I would actually go with James. I don't think the condition edge that Sean usually enjoys was as big as it usually is at this contest, because James, credit where it's due, he did get more condition. This was the most conditioned James in a while, I would say. Still, Sean's going to beat him in terms of overall detail, but the thing is, James is keeping condition close enough that he beats Sean not only in poses, but then in overall size as well. It's a bodybuilding show. James has built more body than Sean, both in a pound for pound scenario, and then overall, he probably weighs like 90 pounds more than Sean. And it shows. It shows. He had big gaps, you could say, about Sean in the side poses, and then James held it together enough of the other poses to, again, like I said, get more poses. It was 5-3 overall. I made a mock scorecard. I'll go ahead and put that on the screen. But, like I said, I'm okay with Sean winning. I understand why he did. It's just more condition, probably, but it can't be all about condition all the time. James's condition was good enough to me, and then he's just, again, so much bigger in a bodybuilding show, in an open bodybuilding show. So at a minimum, I think the scores could have been, on the official scorecard at least, could have been closer. I don't really like how they, besides a couple of placings, like 4 placings, they were all straight scores. So James got straight 8ths, and then Sean got straight 7ths. I think I would have been a little bit more happy with Sean winning had the scores had a little more variability to them and not been straight 8ths and straight 7ths respectively. But that brings us to our first tier, and on paper, I technically do have Akeem winning. And I think the question here becomes, do you want a more complete bodybuilder, that would be William Bonak, or one with great shots and 1 to 2 very poor shots? To me, I do have to go with Bonak, which means I agree with these two guys' placings. Akeem placed 6th and Bonak placed 5th. Akeem has good shots that Bonac is very meh in, like the front double and front lat spread. And then Akeem has great shots that Bonac is right there with him in. That being the side tricep and the side chest. And even though they were meh shots for Bonac in the front double and front lat spread, they're still placing 1 and 2 or back to back in all these shots. So one of them is not outrunning the other in any shot except for the back poses. And yeah, for the rear lat spread, Akeem placed second to Bonac's first, but that's kind of by default. Really, that difference between first and second and that pose particularly was pretty vast, and we don't need to talk about the rear double. Akeem was 4th on the scorecard, he was 6th. He was 11th in real life because there were 11th guys. So he was 11 out of 11 in the rear double pose. Worst back in the show. And then when you expand these two guys to an actual overall in-depth comparison with the overall physique categories, Bonac would definitely hold everything close, but get a good win in condition, especially at prejudging. This is kind of the deciding factor here, the smoking gun, if you will. Akeem was a little more off at prejudging. He often comes into 2-day shows looking pretty off on prejudging, but cleans it up in the next night. And sure, we looked at the footage tonight, and this is at the Saturday show. This is finals, where Akeem did look better. However, even this package was not as good as some of the other things he brought in, for example, Romania and the Big Man Pro, I think it was. He was much better at that show than he was even at the finals here. Prejudging was kind of a miss. He definitely could have been worse. But then at finals, it also still wasn't his best look. And then when you have Bonac, who is more complete and then more shredded on both nights, you do kind of have to go with him in a close scenario because he's well-rounded. And in a close scenario, Akeem can get away with having literally no rear double and having a rear lat spread. He can usually get away with having weaker shots as long as he's on. As long as the other things are 10 out of 10, he can usually get away with some holes, some gaps here or there. But then when he's not 100% on, you start to look at someone like Bonac and he's like, well, he's on both nights. He's on more overall. His condition is better overall. And then he's more complete overall. So yes, I do agree with the judges, and I would go with Bonac as the first place out of this lineup, which means I firmly believe he was the rightful 5th place winner, and then Akeem was the rightful 6th place winner at the 2025 Arnold Classic. But that's going to do it for today's video. Let me know what you guys thought of this comparison, and of course, let me know what you guys thought about this format. I think I could definitely improve it. This is the first video I've done like this. Could shorten it down a little bit, could streamline my notes process so that way the whole video is streamlined. Kind of like doing this, I could definitely get better at it. So let me know what you think of this comparison and this format and my thoughts on this comparison down in the comments below. But other than that, I'm going to keep it short and sweet today. Make sure you guys hit the like button, subscribe for more, and I will see you all in the next video.
Gotta get that Lexia.